Hello, lovely people. So I think it's time to start measuring these mid-ranges. So for those who haven't watched my previous videos, I have loads of mid-ranges to test, all different kinds, all different brands. And I think we're gonna start by testing the impedance because impedance graph of a speaker can tell a lot about its constructions, its like major flaws, or how good it can potentially be. Some impedance graphs are published with the datasheet of the speakers, but some are not. I did break in all of these speakers, so these measurements are going to be post break-in, and I'm going to do impedance sweeps on all of them. So how do I do the impedance sweeps first? Because I do realize that I have a lot of new followers, a lot of new watchers that don't really know what equipment I use and how I do things. So I do not have a data and DATs. As you can see, I have something else. The easiest way is to measure the impedance with the data and DATs. However, since I don't have it, I have to come up with something else. Every two-channel audio interface can measure impedance of any speaker. If you go to REW, because I do use REW, if you go to help section, show help, here, if you're going to pop in impedance measurements, it's going to give you this little nice diagram of how to connect your audio interface inputs and outputs with a resistor in order to measure the impedance of a speaker. So I have this exactly here. I have two inputs, one output over there, and just one simple resistor here. And then I connect it to a speaker, and I can measure the impedance. So I'm going to show you how I do the impedance sweeps, and then we're going to jump into the laptop and we're going to see all of this data here. So if I'm going to open the measure tab in REW, usually we do measure SPL and this is a sweep, but now we're going to go to impedance. So for impedance, I'm going to choose the length. It can be the shortest length, it doesn't matter. So the shortest 2.7, then -1 dBFS level because it's not clipping, the signal is clean, it's fine. And we're going to measure from 5 Hertz to 48 kilohertz. Just because why not? The audio interface is set at, here I'm going to show you, as your drivers, 96K, yeah, everything like it's supposed to be. So if I'm going to go here and I'm going to do a quick sweep, just start. It did the sweep exactly the same like you would hear on data and DATs. And here in impedance and phase, or all impedance, we have the impedance graph. So now, very quickly, I'm just going to change these clips to another speaker, just like that. And now we're going to do another measurement. Measure impedance, start. And here we have two very different impedance measurements, and every speaker will have slightly different impedance measurements. So let's jump into the laptop. I'm gonna show you how all of these drivers measured, and we're gonna compare it and see what we can do with this data. Okay, so you can see that I have quite a lot of measurements. Now, the main issue that I have with these measurements is that I need some kind of a format how to present it to you, because I can show like each individual measurements one by one, but how do we compare them and what is better and what is worse? Let me show you an example of one measurement. Let's take for Fatal Pro, for example, this one. Now, from this measurement, we can see a few things. So we see the FS, which is here. From only this measurement, we can see the Q of the driver, the QTS, which depends on how high this peak is and how wide it is. And as well, we can see the LE, which is the inductance, how high or how low this is. If I'm going to show you this one, for example, you can see that these two drivers have different FS. This is much lower FS. This is much higher, and the inductance of the blue one, which is the Dayton, is much higher, and the inductance of the Fatal Pro 4-inch, it's much lower because it's totally flat. Now, I personally think, and feel free to disagree with that, I think that we need to pay attention while comparing these drivers into a few things, which is the FS, the QTS of the driver, and the LE, the inductance. Now, why? The FS of the driver kind of dictates how low it can play. The lower FS, the lower the driver can play while it's behaving nicely, because FS, everything above FS is controlled by the motor structure of the driver, so by the magnetic forces and electromagnetic. Everything below FS is controlled only by suspension, and that's why below FS you have always high rising distortion, because the suspension just cannot hold the driver properly. So the lower the FS, the lower it can play, technically, kinda, cleaner, without any distortion. Now, the Q of the driver, I have a whole 1 hour video about the Q, so I'm not going to repeat myself, but the Q of the driver is kind of tells us again how good it is to play in open air, because the mid-ranges, we're going to be installing them in the dash or in A-pillars that are going to be open, and they're going to be kind of in free air. So we want the driver to be a Q of about 0.5, 0.7. If it's much higher, such as like 1 or 1.5, it's going to be a peak in the frequency response, and we don't want that. If it's too low, that means, like if it's 0.3 or something, that means that that driver needs some kind of enclosure to reinforce the bottom end. And inductance is one of the most important things, because inductance is directly correlated to the distortion of the driver. Basically, the lower the inductance, the cleaner the driver is, and the lower the inductance, the better top end extension it is. So since these are mid-range drivers, some of them can be used as full range all the way up to 20K. So if the inductance is very low, such as in this Fatal Pro F4FE42, it can play all the way up to 20K. So these are the three main things that I think are the most important. Now, the other thing that is important, and it's going to be totally subjective, so feel free to disregard it, is, in my opinion, what's important is the linearity of the impedance graph. If I'm going to zoom in on this graph quite a lot, such as like this, we can see some peaks and bumps in the impedance graph. Every bump, every nonlinearity in the impedance graph is showing us that something is happening inside the driver with the driver. So it could be the surround, it could be the cone, it could be a ringing basket, it could be many different things that I cannot pinpoint to you, but I can tell that the more linear this is, in my subjective opinion, again, this is subjective, the better the driver is. So if I'm going to compare this with, for example, Brax, you can see the difference. The Fatal Pro has all of these bumps and stuff happening. So for example, I think like this bump at 3K, it cannot be surround. Surround usually is at about 1.5 to 2K in this region. That's a surround issue. This is something else with the driver happening. I don't know what. But the Brax, you can see there is absolutely nothing. It's clean like a glass. So instead of showing you every single driver one by one, I'm going to kind of try to summarize it. What I'm going to do, this file that I have here, the REW file, I'm going to save it. I'm going to put it on my Google Drive. And whoever wants to analyze these measurements one by one in great detail, please feel free to download it, open an REW, and you can see every single measurement taken, and you can compare it one by one. Now, I'm just going to show you, I came up with a table such as this, and I'm going to show you how I did that. So in this table, I have a driver name, I have FS, QTS, LE, and linearity. So let me explain these things. These three measurements, FS, QTS, and LE, are taken directly from the impedance graph. Now, I can pinpoint the FS like this, but I cannot. You can technically calculate the Q and LE, but I'm using tools, field small parameters, and here, this is a page where REW calculates the TS parameters. However, these parameters, most of them will need either added mass, either an enclosure. However, I'm cheating a little bit just because some measurements do not require anything, and they're taken only from this one single impedance graph. So if I'm going to take, for example, this one audio, the first measurement that I have, and the second one, I'm just choose added mass, whichever, doesn't matter. It's just the only thing that fs has to be lower. And these, everything here does not matter. If I'm going to press calculate the parameters, what I'm getting, these. So fs is not going to change, doesn't matter what kind of thing I'm going to choose, because fs, again, is only from this. Exactly the same, the QTS, and exactly the same, the LE. So these three things are calculated by REW from this one single impedance graph. If you want to know like moving mass, CMS, VAS, and all the other stuff, you will need a second measurement with either added mass, either sealed box. But I don't want any of those measurements. I don't need those parameters. I'm interested only the FS, QTS, and LE. So I took these three numbers for every single driver, and I've put it in this table. I made this for the physical measurements of the drivers, and I'm keeping the same. So these drivers are from the smallest one to the biggest one. And I did this for a purpose that when we're gonna evaluate these numbers, we can tell that, okay, maybe it's not fair to give it like a bad thing just because the driver is very small. All of these drivers are post break-in. They're not brand new. I did play them for 2 hours on sine tones. They are broken in, and these are measurements after the breaking in. Now, again, this evaluation with colors and stuff, this is what I came up with. And again, please feel free to disagree with that. It's just my summary of what I think about this. So my evaluation is as follows. I gave the color rating like from red, orange, light green, and dark green, depending how I think it's either bad or good. Now, the FS, to me personally, a good number is a low number. As I mentioned, the lower the FS, technically the lower the driver can play. Now, again, it might be not fair because the higher FS drivers can be higher sensitivity and it can be more desirable. However, again, this is just my subjective evaluation of the drivers. For this specific purpose, I say that the higher the FS, the worse it is, because I want my mid-range driver to play as low as possible. So for this, we pull these numbers and we can see that obviously these first three are in red because these are the smallest drivers. So these like 2.5 inch, 3 inch. So the Dayton RS75 with FS of 200, the Alpine 3 inch little driver 168, and this is not a crouton. It's I don't remember how it's called, but it's the French driver that I don't know the name and I cannot pronounce it. I just came up with a crouton because it's just funny and I just left it as it is. That one is 200. Now you can say that it's bad that it's 200. However, this is a small driver and I guarantee it is a very high sensitivity driver. So again, even if it's not fair, it's just for comparison, it's just for me. Now the other standout is one audio driver that has an FS of 166, which is much higher, if you can see like 20, sometimes 30 hertz higher compared to all the other drivers. Most of these drivers you can see, they end up about 120, 110, something about 120 on average. So being 166 is quite high. And again, I guarantee, I didn't measure it, but I guarantee that this driver is going to be high sensitivity. So it's going to need very little power. That's why it has a high FS. But again, for this, I'm just giving it a red one because it's relatively high compared to others. Now, other ones, Fostex, 174 hertz, which is quite high, but again, it has very little Xmax and is going to be very sensitive driver. And Fatal Pro, the 4 inch FE42, 127. So it's not as high because you can see like 120, 120, all the others, but considering that this is a 4 inch driver, from a 4 inch, you would expect a lower FS, such as like the Stag MSS3, 118, which is lower than this. So again, it's just for me. Now I did add the dome, because people wanted to see how the domes perform. So the Peerless Dome driver, the little one which costs like 7 pounds, it has a very low FS, surprisingly, 122. And this is because I think it's not like a real dome driver. It's a normal driver with a dome cone. So it's just a different shape cone, but it has a lot of X-Max, it has a good suspension, same like others. However, there's the other one, the Chinese dome driver. It has an FS of 530. So I'm just gonna show you. This is the Peerless Dome, and this is the Chinese. So it has a very weird impedance graph with 2 peaks. I don't know why. Maybe something bad with it, but yeah, it is what it is. So this is a typical like high FS for a dome driver. Now these are the red ones. The green ones that I pointed out are the ones that have very low FS. So the ones that really stand out is the Brax ML3, which has an FS of 94, which is super, super low. Sound Hits, which is the Chinese driver, 3.5 inch, which has a very similar FS of 98. It has a very soft suspension. It's very light. The one thing that's worth mentioning probably is just Brax has some kind of plastic composite basket. It's not metal, so it's a bit light. So I don't know, maybe it has to do something with this, but very soft suspension, very low FS. And the other one is the Dayton ND94, which looks like a small subwoofer that has even lower, like 84 hertz FS, so very, very low. So these that are just stand out. Now, as I mentioned, it doesn't mean that red is bad, green is good. It's just stuff that stands out from the rest, because we're trying to compare the drivers and look how are they different. Now, all the other ones are kind of very similar. Maybe like this La Voce 144, slightly higher than the others. But the rest is like 120, 130, 110, very, very similar. Very, very similar numbers. I will upload this table as well, just for you to see. Now let's go to the Q. The Q of the driver, as I mentioned, ideally we want something between 0.7, 0.5, something like that. Everything that is higher than 0.7 is going to have a slight peak in the frequency response at the bottom end. So these are the orange ones that are kindly slightly higher than 0.7, which is the small Dayton, another Dayton, 0.9, Fostex 0.9, and Steg MSS3, the big one, the big boy, 0.9 as well. So yeah, slightly higher QTS compared to 0.7. The ones that are not colored are like ideal. So you have 0.5, 0.5, 0.6, 0.7, and you can see it's vast majority of them are very, very good. The ones that are kind of stand out is the super low one, which is ScanSpeak 10F. 0.4, 0.38. So this is quite low. It's not bad, but it's low. I did check in the spec sheet of ScanSpeak, and they do mention something very, very similar. So this is the lowest lowest QTS driver from the bunch. And some people say that this Scan 10F doesn't like to play low. It kind of makes sense, because if you have a driver with low Q and you cross it quite low, it might have a higher distortion at the lower end, but the FS is low as well. But in general, it stands out because it's the lowest one. Now all the others are kind of okay. This is 0.4 for Fatal Pro, 1 audio, 0.5, 0.4, 0.5, something like that, 0.5 Fatal Pro. So this is lower than ideal, but still very, very good. All the others are very good, and the red ones. So the red ones are SB10, SB Acoustics, small driver, 1.2 QTS. So 1.2 will definitely have a little peak in the frequency response at the bottom end. This one, the Sound Hits, the one with the low FS, but it has high Q as well, 1.1, so it does stand out. The other Chinese one, a Hi-Fine T35, 1.3, high as well. And this one, the other Hi-Fine, which is very surprising, is a Q of 2,
So it's a very, very high Q. And I guarantee that it's going to have a massive peak at about FS, like in the frequency response. So yeah, not ideal. Not a disaster, but not ideal. So this is just a comparison how big or small the Q is. Now we're going to go to the inductance, LE. Since I mentioned that inductance is directly correlated to distortion and the high-end extension, what we want is to have the lowest LE possible. Basically, the lowest LE, the higher the driver will play and the cleaner it will play. Again, in theory. So from these drivers that stand out are the Alpine has one of the highest LE, 0.3. So from the data sheets that I was looking, 0.3 something for a mid-bass driver with a big coil. So this is definitely not a wide band because it's not going to play very high. It's going to have a roll off at the top end. And I did test it. It does have a roll off at the top end. So this is the highest inductance. Now the other one is this one, Dayton ND94, which has an LE of 0.5, which is very high as well because 0.5 is the inductance that SQ, like very, very high quality subwoofers have. So yeah, it is kind of a mini subwoofer, very low FS and very high LE. Now again, high LE doesn't necessarily mean a bad thing because a high inductance coils can, in theory, handle much more power. The others that really stand out are the ones that has the lowest inductance, which is 0.01 or 0.02. From these, the ones stand out are the Fatal Pro 3FE25, the legendary, that we know is a full range driver. It can play all the way up to 20K. And these, La Voce and One Audio. So La Voce is kind of an SPL brand, similar to Fatal Pro. So it's kind of maybe a competitor, I don't know, but it does have very low inductance, and we know there's going to be a full range driver. Another one is One Audio. So One Audio has very low inductance, and it will play very, very high. So again, just to demonstrate you the difference between these. So let's take 3FE25 and the Alpine. There we go. So these are the impedance graphs. Obviously, the difference is in the resistance impedance. So because the Alpine is a 6 ohm driver and all the other ones are 4 ohm drivers. But you can see the inductance, how big of a difference. The Alpine, it just rises like a subwoofer, like a mid-bass driver. And for the Fatal Pro, is just literally flat. And all the other ones, the ones that are not colored, are very, very low inductance. So majority of them, like Stag, Fatal, the Crouton, surprisingly, some Chinese drivers have very low inductance as well. However, these drivers, I think they have very, very little coils because they cannot handle that much power. They're rated at 10, 15 watts only, so they cannot handle a lot of power, and that's why on a smaller coil, you're going to have lower inductance. So some of these Chinese drivers have very low inductance. Scan, very low inductance. The Dayton, again, this is a Chinese one, Alpine Status, and Fatal Pro. All the other ones, like in orange, they're not bad, but they're higher than the average of all of these. So that includes SB Acoustics, this is Chinese, Brax. So yeah, it's not as low inductance as you can have from other drivers, but it's not bad, 0.14, yeah. This is Chinese, Fostex, same like Brax, and Stag MSS3. They're not bad, but just slightly higher than the rest. Now, the final point is linearity. So this that I gave, red and green, is subjective. It's totally subjective that I had a look at the impedance graph and I said, okay, this to me looks bad, so I put a red, and that to me looks good, so I put a green. So these drivers that do stand out. Fatal Pro 3FE22, One Audio, another Fatal Pro, and Stag MSS3. Let me show you why. So these drivers are in a row. So from the worst looking one to the best looking one, excluding these two domes. So when I had a look at these graphs like this, as I mentioned, the smoother the impedance graph is, to me personally, I think is just a better driver. So when I opened the one audio one and I saw this, that's a peak, that's a peak, that's a peak, that's a peak, and that's a peak, and wiggles. So to me, this graph from like 500 and up looks much worse than any other driver. So for example, scan, flat. Dayton, yeah, something here, but much flatter. La Voce, flat. What else? The Chinese driver, flat. Steg, flat. You can see like all the others, this is the status has something like here, but all the rest is flat. So from all the drivers, to me personally, this looks the worst. Now, I thought maybe it's something to do with the single drivers, because I do have some of these drivers I have in singles, and some of them I have pairs. I do have two of these drivers. So I just took the second one and I measured the second one as well. And I have the same peaks. One peak, two, three, four. Exactly the same. So my conclusion is that this is something with the driver. Are we going to see something in the frequency response and the distortion? Maybe we're going to connect this, maybe not, I'm not sure. And here you can see the driver, it's a very good example, before break-in and after break-in. So this one, it's new. So it's without breaking in. And you can see that FS of the new one is 170. And when you break it in, the FS lowers 166. So that's going down by like what, 3 hertz? Not much, but there is a difference. So just to show you that the drivers are really broken in. I didn't test brand new drivers. But yeah, this looks to me the worst. Now the other one is Fatal Pro for FE22. Something like this. Now you can argue that maybe the Fatal Pro looks worse than this. Maybe. Again, it's just because, as I mentioned, this is subjective. This is how I just put them together. And this driver is 8 ohms, so you can see it's much higher. It measures 6 DC. So it's an 8 ohm driver versus a 4 ohm driver. But you can see as well, wiggle, 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 wiggle. Now when I'm looking at it, probably the Fatal Pro is worse than One Audio. Yeah, it has more wiggles. But yeah, this doesn't look nice. Now the other one, another Fatal Pro. Let me remove these just to see. Yeah, so this one you can see it has a big peak here and one wiggle, 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 wiggle here. So it's not as bad as like this One Audio to me personally, and not as bad as this Fatal Pro. But yeah, not as great. Then on top of the list is Steg MSS3, which has these wiggles. Wiggle, 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 wiggle. After that, because I think I gave only 4 of these, 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah. So for 4 of these, I gave this red grid because to me, subjectively, the impedance graph doesn't look as linear. So as I mentioned, Fatal Pro, One Audio, another Fatal Pro, and Steg MSS3, the big boy. After that, we have drivers that are kind of okay. So most of the drivers are gonna have a little bump, a single little bump that is caused by the surround. So for example, this Fostex has one, the French Crouton has something here as well, but you can see it's much more linear, but it has something. Then one of the Chinese has something, and yeah, you can see. So if you want to analyze one by one every single one, you can do that. But you can see like 2 kilohertz, same the Dayton. Most of the drivers will have something. The other side of the spectrum are the green ones that I gave. So Dayton RS75, SB Acoustics 10, Brax ML3, one of the Chinese drivers. These, to my eye, they have the most linear response. So this is, for example, Brax. I personally cannot see a single wiggle on this impedance graph. Absolutely nothing. Smooth like butter. The other one, this Chinese one, high T35, whatever, with the low FS. So this is a candidate to be a very good driver. However, this has a very high Q. Not as high, but high, 1.3. But again, you can see smooth, maybe a little something here, maybe, but super smooth. Then the Dayton as well, again, smooth like butter, literally nothing is happening. So to me, this indicates that these drivers are very well designed, or maybe in this Chinese driver's case, it might be just, I don't want to say anything bad, but maybe it was an accident that it was designed very good. I don't know, because it's surprising that a driver can perform good and it would be well designed when it costs so little. But if you take example like this, the Dayton and Brax, both of them super, super flat, no wiggles, no nothing, but the price for these drivers are massive, the price difference. And the rest, all the other ones are somewhere in between. Some of them have, like this one has something here in the very top, Steg. The Chinese has something here, wiggle, some wiggle. They're not as bad, but like little wiggle here. This is good actually as well. Which one is in Chinese one? Yeah, La Voce. La Voce has like something here, a bit rising here. Then it's like it's not as linear. So you can see Status has this, it has this. Yeah, all the other ones are somewhere like in between. They're good, but the red and green are kind of stand out. So again, you can download this, you can download that, and you can have a look by yourselves. But if I would have to summarize all of these drivers and just, again, just subjectively to pick the best ones only from the impedance graphs and nothing else. Only look at the impedance graphs and nothing else. No frequency response, no distortion, nothing. If I would have to pick the best ones, that would be the ones that don't have anything red or orange. So for example, Stegem SS30 is good. Everything is good. There's nothing bad with it. Like the Fatal Pro would be good apart from it has wiggles in the impedance graph. The other Fatal Pro, the big magnet one, it's very good. No issues. La Voce is very good. One Audio is kind of disappointing in a way that it has a lot of those wiggles, similar to the Fatal Pros, and it has a quite high FS. So maybe when we're gonna measure the distortion, maybe it's gonna be, maybe it's gonna outperform all the others. But from this, I don't know. It doesn't look good subjectively. Again, not objectively, but subjectively compared to all the other ones. What else stands out? All of these are kind of good. The Chinese one, this one is very good. Mid 3.5, I don't know, there's nothing wrong with it. On the green side, Brax ML3 stands out because low FS, ideal Q, low LE, not the lowest, but low, and linearity is just stellar. So this stands out as well. What else? Scan F is just a low Q, but all the other stuff is kind of very similar to others. This Chinese Hi-Fine 3-inch stands out as not as great, just because of the very high Q. This Dayton is very similar, high Q, but not as high as the Hi-Fine, so it's fine. Fostex, it's an interesting one because you can see it's not very nice colors, but again, all of this I think is going to be compensated with very high sensitivity. I would imagine it's going to be a very sensitive driver because this is not bad. This is not bad. It's just a slightly higher FS, but relatively compared to others, it kind of stands out as with slightly different parameters. So I think it's going to be high sensitivity. But for this, I just put it red. But even if it's not fair, I don't really care. Again, it's just subjective. This Dayton, this mini subwoofer is very interesting, but very high inductance, the highest inductance of all the drivers. So it's not going to play high. Maybe as a mid-range up to like 2K with the low FS tweeter. Maybe we're going to see. We're going to see at the frequency response. The status, everything is perfect. No issues there. The Fatal Pro, this is the new one that I had very high hopes, and it kind of stands out mainly with the linearity of the impedance graph because it has a lot of wiggles. But this is typical for most Fatal Pro drivers and relatively high FS for a 4-inch driver. And you can see I put this MSS3 as red, but again, FS is fine. The Q slightly higher than ideal, but not bad. LE higher than average, I want to say, and it has some little wiggles in the impedance graph. So that's why. And probably I said 10 times, and I'm going to repeat myself as well again, that this evaluation is subjectively done by me. You can disregard it. Every single word that I said is just what I think, literally only from the impedance graph and nothing else. So from all of these drivers, what I'm going to do, I'm going to put a minus for the Alpine. I'm going to put minus for the One Audio for now. I'm going to put plus for the Brax. I'm going to put minus for the Fostex, plus for the Alpine, plus for this Steg MS30, and this Chinese one. This is surprising because just according to these, it's good. It's very good. There's no issues with it whatsoever. And again, this is my just subjective evaluation. I would really, really like to hear your comments about this. Again, I'm going to attach this sheet. I'm going to attach all of this. Have a look at these measurements, go through them, and I would like to hear your opinions in which regard you might disagree with me, or in some cases, maybe you do agree. So I would really, really interested in what you think about this data. So this is just the impedance graph. The next video is going to be the actual measurements. So we're going to measure the frequency response, the distortion, and everything else. So I do apologize that it took me half an hour to go through all of this, but you know me, I go in very high detail and I like to analyze every single thing. So thank you very much for watching, guys, and I will see you in the next one.